All right, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Carlson School of Management, welcome to How Women Rise with author Sally Helgesen. My name is Tori Williamson, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at the Carlson School. We are thrilled to welcome Carlson School alumni, students, and friends to today's program. Alumni Relations at the Carlson School strives to connect our community to the school and to each other, but also to provide meaningful and valuable opportunities to learn from thought leaders like today's speaker. We believe we are in a unique position to be a convener of business experts, research, and innovative ideas. Just a few months ago, we launched Carlson Women Global Connect. We heard from our alumni community that they are thriving and craving of women-focused programming that is open to all, and I'm excited to work with a network of amazing alumni leading this charge. As we get started, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Darlene Roy Johnson. Darlene is the professional development lead with Carlson Women Global Connect and is the person responsible for bringing you today's program. Darlene is a women's leadership coach who works with high-achieving women leaders who are overwhelmed because they're trying to do it all so perfectly, including managing their career, their team, and their family. And I know I could use some coaching in that area as well. One of her current COVID-19 inspired goals is to provide 6 to 10 weeks of pro bono coaching to 100 overwhelmed women leaders. She has done 15 so far and has 85 to go. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Darlene.
Thank you, Tori, very much. Now, before I introduce Sally, Amy, could you actually move to the agenda slide? There we go. I want to introduce the agenda because it's going to be jam-packed with great information, and then let you know what's going to happen after the first portion. All right, as you can see from the agenda, from 12 to 1, we had the introductions. Then we're really going to focus on the How Women Rise. And as you can see, we're going to zero in on the top 3 habits that hold you back from your next raise, promotion, or job. Because this is what you told us in the survey that you completed when you registered. And then we'll close it off with some highlights and the pre-closing. I highly recommend that you stick around for the second part because we're going to really get into the peer learning and the application, all centered around How Women Rise. We'll provide you with some group instructions and the breakout. And then, again, we'll have some highlights and closing. Can I get the next slide? All right. When you filled out the registration for today's session, we asked you, what is the #1 habit that holds you back from getting a raise, a promotion, or a job? And this is how you responded. These were the top 3. Habit number 2, expecting others to spontaneously notice and reward your contributions. Habit number 6, putting your job before your career. Habit number 7, the perfection trap. And guess what? The majority of my women leadership clients really need to work on habit 2 and habit 7 also. All right, next slide, please. I am so excited about introducing Sally Helgesen. Again, as you can see in this information, I'm going to actually refer to my written information here too, because part of it is blocked off. She has been cited in Forbes as the world's premier expert in women leadership. She's got over 30 years in that. She's an internationally best-selling author of 7 books. Most recently, of course, How Women Rise. And I have read it, I have digested it, I have used it. It's a beautiful, very thorough book. All right, and then let's see. And she co-authored it with Marshall Goldsmith. If you're not familiar with Marshall Goldsmith, he is also a very well-known leadership coach and a business educator. She's been ranked number 6 among the world's top 30 leadership thinkers by Global Gurus. And then she's been chosen by 2 organizations, Thinkers 50 and 100 Coaches, as the world's top coach for women leaders. And these two organizations are considered the Oscars of management thinking. They find the individuals that are worth that Oscar. She delivers seminars, workshops, and master coaches classes around the world. And she was born in Minnesota. Take it away, Sally.
Thank you, Darlene. It's wonderful to be here. It's a great pleasure. I don't need any slides going forward. I just want to see your beautiful faces. It is such a gift to be here with you today and have the opportunity to draw from How Women Rise and drill down on some of the habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women and hold them back as they seek to rise in their careers. A minute of background. How Women Rise, the book, which focuses on 12 habits, was inspired by my co-author, Marshall Goldsmith's wonderful book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is about the habits and behaviors most likely to hold successful people back as they move into leadership positions. Now, I thought Marshall's guiding idea was brilliant. It was that the same habits and behaviors that can serve you well early in your careers can be the exact ones that hold you back as you seek to move higher. And yet you remain loyal to them because you know that they've gotten you to where you are. So I had seen this working in my own work as a coach and doing leadership workshops with women for many decades. I'd seen the principle in operation, but I thought that Marshall got some of the behaviors wrong. He was drawing from his own coaching practice, which is about 85% men. And so he started off with things like learn to apologize, which really gave me a laugh since one of the things I find is that often women cannot stop apologizing and stop always talking about how great you are and don't always feel like you need to win everything. So I suggested to Marshall that we take his fundamental idea, but look at it in terms of the habits that were most likely to hold women back, and that we collaborate on that. And How Women Rise has been the result. And it's been a very, very affirming journey. I think the biggest surprise for me is how the extent to which this is a global phenomenon. We've sold 18 rights in 18 languages. And when I went on the media tour to Japan, the comment I kept getting was, oh, we thought these were just habits of Japanese women. So it's really been very interesting to watch how this plays out in very different cultural contexts and see the universality of it. Now, as Darlene mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on 3 habits that you chose in your survey. And I want to say one thing before we start, because I often get this question. I'm focusing on habits that can get in your way, and that is internal barriers that can hold you back. So often people will say, well, why didn't you focus on culture or structure or things, external things in organizations that can hold women back? And I've done that in previous books for many decades, but I really felt it was important to focus on internal barriers here because they lie within our control. We have the potential to have better careers, better experiences in the workplace by addressing the habits that lie within our control. Those are the internal barriers. And that's why I wanted to focus on this. So that's the underlying goal. In my experience, the way in which organizations are most likely to change culturally and structurally and become better places for women is when there are more women in senior positions. So that's my goal, is helping women achieve their fullest potential. So 3 habits. And I'm going to take a couple breaks here rather than just going on and speaking and then taking questions at the end. I find it's more interactive and people tend to have a lot of questions that they want to ask. So the first habit that I am talking about is expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions. This came up first in your survey. This was no surprise. I almost never do a program where that isn't on the list. So what do we mean when we talk about this? What we mean is that women are often reluctant to directly speak about their contributions and achievements. And what I hear is, oh, I don't want people to think that I'm arrogant. I don't want people to think that I'm all about me. My team deserves credit, so I'm not really comfortable talking about what I did. So in other words, you're sort of privileging managing other people's expectations over being clear about what you achieved and contributed, how you played a role in something being successful. And that's often because we may have been criticized in the past, or we may fear criticism in the future. But when we don't address this directly, we create problems for ourselves. Usually the most common thing I find, and that's enshrined in this behavior, is that in order to avoid speaking directly about what we do, we adapt a passive strategy whereby we hope people will notice what we did. We expect it. I hear women all the time still say things like, I believe that if I do a great job, people should notice. Well, they should. And if we lived in a perfect world, they probably would, but we don't live in that world. And people are very busy, and every one of us needs a strategy for drawing attention to what we accomplish. And this is very important, because if we don't do this, and I've watched this for decades, if we don't do this, we will begin to feel under-recognized and undervalued, and we have the potential to disengage from a job that may be perfect for us in many ways, and a company that may be good for us, but we feel disengaged because we feel that we're not valued. So we need a strategy for getting recognized for what we contribute. One of the things that I have found very helpful for women, and this comes directly from the book, is to present what we do and to frame it in our minds as information that can be helpful in helping other people understand what we have contributed, information that's valuable to them. I came by this from there's a story in the book, but it was from some work I was doing with a client. She was a young woman out in Silicon Valley, very, very talented. And she was at the time that I met her, extremely discouraged because she'd gone away on her first performance review with her new boss. They were not co-located. And going away with him, what his primary comment was, you do terrific work, but I really need you to be more connected. You are not sufficiently known or recognized. And I think as a result, our unit isn't as visible as it needs to be. And this young woman, Ellen, went away from that meeting really feeling as if she had been hit in the face, because she said, you know, that's what I'm best at. She said, I'm a real go-to person around here. A lot of the other engineers I work with are much more introverted. People come to me, they call me, they ask me, they bring their problems to me. They ask for connections. She said, and the fact that he doesn't know that about me makes me feel as if he has no idea what I could do or be, and as if I'm undervalued. And it took Ellen a few weeks of thinking about it. But what she finally recognized is that he didn't know because he had no way of knowing. She had never told him. She had never informed him. She had never shared directly with him what she was doing, the people she was connecting with. So she came up with a plan to try to get recognized for it that she felt very, very awkward about. And that is, she decided she was going to write him a 1 or 2 line email every Friday morning that just simply said, "Dear Jim, this week I connected with," and then 3 to 5 names. Then that was it. Best Ellen. That was the format. Nothing more, nothing less. 3 to 5 names of people she had connected with that week. And she didn't hear back from him. She said, "I felt like an idiot because here I'm sending him this email. I get no response. He's probably thinking, why is this woman wasting my time?" He said, but about 2 months later, she said, we were at an event. Remember, they weren't co-located. And he came right up to her and said, "Thank you so much for that email you sent. That is information that I need to know. That is valuable information. It helps me understand who my division is connected with." And I thought the takeaway from that was really thinking of what you do, not as bragging, not as, "Oh, I'm so great," but as valuable information for other people can be a very, very useful thing for women. But one other thing about this story that I think is important is that Ellen really took a risk here. She did something that was uncomfortable for her, and she didn't get a response, but she persisted in doing that thing that was uncomfortable for her, knowing it was risky. She felt it made her feel vulnerable and to some degree foolish. And that's an important thing to remember, because whenever any of us practice a new behavior, it feels like a risk. It takes a while to get comfortable doing something that has been uncomfortable in the past. 2 more quick things, and then I think I'll open it up for a moment for some questions, because there usually are a lot of questions on this habit. Often people will say, well, my team really does a lot of this work. I am a member of the team. So how am I supposed to talk about what I do and acknowledge that? It's not an either or, it's a both and. You can always say, well, that venture was successful. Our team was able to do this. We got this response from the client. Then we learned how to make some adjustments, and this was the outcome. This is what I contributed to the effort. So you're making it clear. This is a team, but it's also you. It's not an either or. It's not all about you or all about the team. It's both and. And the more that you can think about that, the more helpful it is. And the other thing there, you'll notice how I phrase that, is that using the language of contribution rather than achievement or wins can be very helpful and is often very comfortable for women. This is what I was able to contribute rather than this is what I was able to do. A very helpful way of phrasing it. So those are things that can help you get more comfortable talking about what you contributed, putting it in the context of a team, but being clear about what you did, and using the language of contribution. Thinking of it, framing it in your mind as information that could be valuable to someone else instead of all about me. It doesn't make you like that jerk down the hall who's always talking about how fabulous he or she is. It's a way that you can have of being graceful and making a contribution, but doing the right thing by yourself to get noticed so you don't disengage. Do you have any questions, darling?
Hi, Sally. This is Mary Angela, and I'm coming to you from Maryland. And first of all, I want to say thank you for being part of our first inaugural speaker today. I'm so excited to have you here and absolutely love your book and have passed it out to many women. And just know that if I have a copy and someone borrows it, that I'll never see it again. But my question is about women supporting women. And when you talk about advocating for yourself, is there a risk that other women will actually not appreciate that you're advocating and actually see it as bragging and be less than supportive of you?
Is there a risk? There may be a risk. And what you want to do is you want to manage that risk. And you want to manage that risk by when you talk, like when you say something like that, then go to the women or the people who've been on your team and say, I want to make it clear what I just did right there. I think it's very important for women to not expect others to spontaneously notice and value their contribution. I know it's very important to speak about what we do. And I was doing it there in the context of the team, but I want to be clear about it. I think it's a very important thing for us to get better at doing, and that we should support one another in doing it. And do that proactively. Don't wait for someone to criticize you and then go into a defensive mode about that. I think it's an opportunity you want to be clear about what you're doing. Here, this is what I'm doing. I think this is important. And I think that we should all be doing this. And I think it will help us all if we can get better at it, practice it. You can also use it as an opportunity for some peer coaching, for a quick, what I call informal enlistment. So you've done something like that, and somebody you're concerned how it may have landed. You're not over managing it, but you just have a concern, and you can say, I'm trying to get better at speaking about what I contribute, because I've really had some feedback and observed that I'm not very good about that. So that was an example of me trying to do it in a graceful and appropriate way. How do you think that went? Is there something I could do that would be more effective going forward? So it then becomes an invitation to the other women to collaborate on doing this for themselves and on helping other women do it. I think that's a very positive approach, so you can turn around. But on the other hand, I do want to say this. So I think that's a way of making it very positive. But we don't want to fall into the trap of over managing and feeling like everybody has to be pleased and have total approval of everything we say and do. Because in that way, we lose our ability to control our own path and our own career. So if there's somebody who's extremely critical of you because you're good at this, you can always say, I've made this decision that this is what I'm going to do. I'm glad to help you if you want to do it. But I think this is the best path for me, rather than how can I make you happier at every single second. So I think that's a good path forward. One of the things about these habits that I've really discovered even more since I've been working with them since the book came out is they're not only helpful to individual women, but they're a great way of helping other women coming up, recognize and address what could get in their way. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Sally?
Hi, good afternoon. I have a question for you. In terms of what I've seen in meetings and collaborations a lot of times is an idea is said and it's taken and credit is given to someone else. How can you nicely nudge that it was an idea that you started?
Okay, there are two things. If your boss says it, I drop it. If your boss picks up on it and says it, then you better let it lie, because they're in the position to do that. But if it's anybody else in the room, I think it's important to handle it. It's important not to let it go. What you don't want to be in the position of leaving the room and then sort of whispering to a friend, did you notice that, Jack did that again? He's always stepping on my ideas. And those other people, they seem to, hey, Jack, that's your idea. You don't want to be in the position of sort of passively trying to undercut what just happened. You want to deal with it directly. So I think the best way always to do it is not defensively, but always with a touch of humor. Oh, I'm so glad you agree with my idea. I really appreciate your support. Not said sarcastically, oh, I'm so glad. I really appreciate your support. No, I'm so glad. I really appreciate your support. So what you're doing is you're making it clear that was me, but I'm glad to have somebody else piling on here. But you owe that to yourself. And if you find yourself in that situation a lot, you can ask someone going into the room, you know, will you just notice if that happens? It happens a lot. And if you feel comfortable, you could say something. If you don't, I get it. But this seems to happen to me a lot, and I get tired of always being the one who has to say something. That can be very effective. And it can be especially effective, I will say, if you ask a man to do it, because he may not have noticed. And, you know, often they'll come out and say, wow, how did you know that was going to happen? It's happened a few times before. But that can be very helpful, because then they, you know, kind of have a way to support you that's very concrete, very micro, very specific, and in the moment. But don't let it go, unless it's your boss. Then, you know, you don't want to contradict them.
Thank you, Sally. I just want to remind everybody, submit your questions via chat.
Yeah, the chat would be good. Let me move on to the next habit, which is also very popular. And that, oh, I got my pages out of order, is putting your job before your career. That is pouring your energy into the job you have, in the belief that if you do a great job at the job you have, you will be promoted, or it will lead you to where you want to go. That is sufficient for you to do a good job. People will notice, people will value it, and you'll end up where you want to. In other words, you're really lacking a strategy here, not for bringing attention to what you're doing, but you're lacking a strategy for where your job fits in to your larger career. And that belief that you'll be promoted based on doing the best job is often not realized. And that can make you feel resentful. I can't believe so-and-so got promoted. I had so much better, you know, I had much better numbers on that. I have better figures, I have better relationships. I'm so surprised that it wasn't me. But one thing that I've learned in my many decades is that every effective career is built on 3 legs. One is expertise, how well you do your job, how well you do the job you have, how much you develop those skills. One is visibility, that's what we were talking about before, and the other is connections. So while you were focused on doing the absolute best job you could, someone else may have been focused on all 3, on doing a good job, but also on building their connections and building their visibility to position themselves for whatever it is that comes next. And there are so many ways in which putting your job before your career can undermine you. For one thing, you prove that you are perfect for the job you have. That's what you're demonstrating. I am the best person for this job. That can make you invaluable. Why would other people want to see you move on? I was talking about this at a program I did in Atlanta at a law firm, a big law firm in Atlanta, when we were still moving around the world. And afterwards, this woman came up. She said, this was so mind-blowing. She said, I came into this firm. I saw that the firm wasn't very good on writing briefs. So I decided I was going to make that my specialty. I was going to become the best brief writer here. She said, and I really developed those skills. She said, it's 14 years later, and I'm still writing the briefs for everyone because they can't let me go. I do such a good job at that. She said, so what I see here for the first time is that I really collaborated in keeping myself stuck. And that's what you can do. I remember working with a woman at a technology firm in Boston. And she said, you know, my boss came in and he said to me, he said, you do such a fantastic job. I was going to recommend you for this other position, but I realized I just can't afford to lose you. And she said, I felt good about that. I felt like, oh, he thinks I'm wonderful. He thinks I'm so valuable. And it took me a while before I realized, so does that mean I'm going to be in this position for the rest of my entire career here? And she realized she had to say something to him, saying, I'm glad you're satisfied with what I'm doing. I feel like I've learned, I feel like I've really developed skills here. But I do have an intention to move on and I'm going to need your help. She, in fact, did that once she saw a job that she really wanted to go for. And he jumped right on board and helped her. So you don't want to make yourself indispensable. You don't want to prove that you are the perfect person for the job you have, and you don't want to get caught in a loyalty trap. And this is to some degree common with women. Loyal to your boss, loyal to your team. Loyalty is a wonderful quality. We're not talking about loyalty not being a good thing here, but your boss moved on to wherever he or she is. And you have that right to do that as well. So you don't want to get feeling, you don't want to put yourself in a position, well, I really can't move on. I don't know what my team would do without me. Your team will manage without you. And in fact, it may be of value to them to have you move on because then they know you as a person who's in a higher position. So I think I have a couple minutes to take a few questions before we
Okay,
move
Sally.
on.
I've got one that's kind of piggybacking on what you just covered from Kendra.
Yes.
And her question is how do we teach men in leadership how to be good sponsors? In other words, supporting and following without them having to be the face or support of your work.
Well, you know, I think that this is a very complicated question. I'm going to take it in two parts. The first is we can help teach men to be more effective sponsors, mentors, champions, and supporters of women by being explicit about what we see as getting in our way. And that can be in terms of a cultural barrier, but it can also be in terms of an internal barrier that you share with other women and have noticed has an impact. So I think that's it's one of the reasons I think How Women Rise has been used. I mean, I've given like 45 programs to basically mostly or all male executive teams about being able to recognize some of these habits so they can figure, you know, because we've tried to promote these 3 women and they say they're not ready and they haven't, you know, they have more skills they have to develop. And so we can't really get any of them. And women seem to me to be lacking in ambition because of X, Y, and Z. And get to some of what these causes are, be clear about it, be explicit about that, and help them think of questions that they can answer. So that's going to be a very effective way of doing it. Let me give you some thoughts that might be helpful to you in terms of mentoring a woman. If she says to you, I'm not ready to move on. If she says to you, oh, I just have to learn my job before I start making connections because I really need, it's such a high learning curve that, you know, I don't have any time to do that. So helping them ask specific questions can be really helpful. There was a second part to that question that I wanted to answer separately. What was it?
Okay, it's let me go back to the question. All right, the second part was I'll just read the whole thing. How do we teach men in leadership how to be good sponsors? In other words, supporting and following, and without them having to be the face and support of your work.
Well, you know, there again, I think there's something that's really important to recognize, and it has to do with the hierarchical nature of most organizations. In most organizations, if the person in charge, if the boss of that division or a specific division, et cetera, is the person who to some degree gets to take credit for the work being a success. That's just the reality of it. Now, there are many, many bosses in the world, and these are good bosses who are happy to share that spotlight and happy to talk about what a good job someone who reports to them did, and happy to give them credit and happy to do that publicly. And there are others who feel threatened by the thought of doing that. And when that is the person you work with, that's a different kind of situation. That's a tough situation that you cannot approach necessarily directly, because that person's going to say, well, this is my team, so, you either get with the program or not. And you certainly don't want to try to approach it by going above the person. That's a recipe for disaster. The best way you can approach it is to build your network as broadly and as richly as you can. Build a network of people at every level in the organization and also externally, so that you gain the kind of visibility and clout that will enable you to get recognized for what you do. But this is a specific thing when you have a leader or a boss who is someone who has no interest in sharing credit, and who you notice swoops in and grabs the credit from everybody else. That's a reality of life in organizations. It's not a good situation, but it does not lie within your circle of concern. I'm very big on the difference between what is our circle of concern and what is our circle of control. So that's something we can't control, but we can address our concern with it by building up that network and the visibility that goes with the network.
Kendra says, thank you. That was absolutely excellent advice. Thank you. I do have one more, Sally, if you'd like another question.
I'd love one.
And it's based on what you just covered too, the importance of networking. All right, so this question is from Carly. How would you recommend making connections across an organization in a virtual environment? Of course, that's what we're all experiencing right now. It can sometimes feel awkward to reach out without a clear business reason.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we're all sort of stumbling with at this point. I think that the best things that I've seen are to try to use this technology to start some smaller informal networks that help us address specific issues with one another. And I have found this to be of inestimable value in the environment that we're in right now, because the same tool, this tool that can be such a challenge in terms of building relationships, also offers us a means to do it. And I think the most effective means is to try to put together small groups on a frequent basis, sometimes for 15 or 20 minutes. Hey, we're going to be having a conversation talking about this. We're going to have a conversation talking about that. If you're interested, sign up. And that's very effective. And I've seen people doing that. The other thing is, I think that this medium puts shows us some of the value of some of our older ways of communicating as well, such as the phone and email. And I find myself, I know, in much more, in more ongoing communication through people with email in a very informal way. What's going on? Oh, I noticed that that your book was cited here, and I just want you to know that I support you. Very short emails. I think that we can really use this period, which is challenging, in order to build up our networks in an unprecedented way, as long as we're pretty proactive about it. So I'm going to move on to our third behavior, which is the perfection trap. And not surprising, this is in the top 3. This is very, very common. And I think one thing that's important to understand about the perfection trap is that of all the habits and behaviors, the 12 that Marshall and I look at, this is the one that is most likely to be problematic, even toxic, at a senior leadership level. Many people who are perfectionists rise fairly quickly in an organization because of their diligence. But when I have seen, which I've seen for 30 years, really talented, hardworking women where their career derails or they don't get an expected position, at the top, it usually has to do with the perfection trap and the perception that they're a perfectionist. So being a perfectionist means essentially that you are either perfect at what you're doing or you're failing. This is an either or. There's no gray area in between where you're allowed to learn and get better. You're perfect or you're failing. And that's how you see it. And that's how it feels to you. Now, one of the fascinating things that we learned when we were researching this book is I think I'd always assumed, and Marshall had, I know as well, that the perfection trap for women was kind of a result of how women are raised, the expectations of girls, et cetera, that are put on girls. And the experience, that there's less tolerance for a naughty little girl than for a naughty little boy in our culture generally. But what we learned was that, in fact, organizations encourage perfectionism in women. And the reason I can say that is we have multiple research studies that show women tend to be rewarded and promoted based upon their being precise and correct. Their work is precise and correct. They get rewarded, they get recognized, they get promoted. Whereas men are more likely to be rewarded and promoted based on the perception that they're big picture thinkers, their connections and their visibility. So very, very different criteria go into promoting women. So it's not surprising that women get the message, the way to succeed, the way to rise, the way to move into leadership is to be precise and correct. Guess what? It's not. That's not what, I've never worked with a company that was in a search for a senior leader that said, we want someone who's precise and correct. It's just not. It's more outward facing mode. They want someone who's comfortable with that. They want someone who's a strategic thinker. Whether the person actually is or not is another topic, but that's what they're looking for. And actually being identified as precise and correct is going to get in your way because it's not what is being scouted for or valued at a senior leadership level. So it's very problematic. The costs of perfectionism as you move higher are very, very high. And they get higher with every step up. First of all, it's very difficult to delegate because how can you delegate when your expectation is that other people's work that they hand in has to be perfect? So you find perfectionists often doing other people's work for them because it's got to be perfect, and they can't tolerate a situation where they have to trust someone else to be perfect, to meet their very high standards, the high standards they put on themselves. By being precise and correct, you identify yourself as a detailed person, and this undermines any ability you have to be perceived of as a big picture thinker, a big picture person, and that's more what's being looked at. You can become chronically risk averse through perfectionism. Everything has to be perfect. How can you take a risk on what you're doing if it's got to be perfect? So that habit can become routine. And I remember shortly after the book came out, I was working with a company. It was a big defense contractor in Hartford, Connecticut, and had the head of HR was just a brilliant woman. And she said to me, we have such a problem in this company with risk averse female engineers. She said that we're trying to solve that by throwing them into jobs they can't possibly do or be good at, just so that they can get comfortable taking the risks that they need to take. So that's how much they value that ability to take measured risks. And then finally, and this is of course so important, you create so much stress when you're a perfectionist. You create stress for yourself, but you create stress for everyone around you. No one ever says, I work for a perfectionistic boss and I love it. I know I say that every time, but it's true. No one ever says, I had a perfectionistic mother and I loved it. No one loves that. So that stress we create through our own expectations, perfectionism, can be very, very tough. Now, I've got a couple suggestions for how to deal with this very difficult habit. I won't sugarcoat it. This is not one of the easier ones to address, but I think I'll open it up for a couple of questions now, and then can get to some of those solutions probably in the answers.
Great. And I love in your book too, how you talk about the perfectionist tendencies to be highly judgmental of others.
Exactly. Yes, of course. It makes sense that we're going to judge others. You know, one thing you always hear, if you're sitting in a meeting where an executive committee is considering a perfectionist for a job, what you'll hear over and over is she has very high standards. She holds herself to high standards, but boy, does she hold other people to high standards. So that expectation that everybody should perform to your specifications, and that disappointment or distrust when they don't is not going to do you any favors.
All right. Jody has a great question. And again, it's piggybacking on a lot of these habits, more zeroing in on almost the perfectionist one. She says, can you ask Sally her thoughts about the imposter syndrome, which seems to be more prevalent in women?
Well, it seems to be because it is. The imposter syndrome is much, much more prevalent in women, and every bit of research I've seen certainly shows that. And I think that the imposter syndrome is very much allied to this perfectionism, and that we feel that because our expectation often for ourselves is that it's going to be, you know, we've got to do things perfectly, then when we don't, or when we know how hard we're trying, when we know how much work we have to put into reaching a certain benchmark, it can make us feel as if we're just a phony and a fraud in some way. I do want to say one other thing. I think it's been very interesting to me. One of the advantages of being in a field like women's leadership for more than 30 years is I've seen a lot of ideas and a lot of trends come and go. And I think that the passionate emphasis on everybody being authentic has its upside and its downside. And I think that that it can exacerbate the belief that we have to be completely authentic at all times, can actually exacerbate that imposter syndrome, because we're thinking, well, is this really me? Am I showing up as me? Am I a complete fraud and a phony? I think it's much more useful to think of yourself in terms of, I'm aspiring to be a professional. I want to be a professional here. So it's not, is this the real me? Is this a fake me? But to some degree, being a professional, it's not always just showing up as you feel at that particular moment. I just had my second Moderna shot. I don't feel like much right now, I can tell you, but I'm a professional. So I'm not going, well, yeah, I guess, being a professional, I think it's a good way to think yourself out of the imposter syndrome, and a good way to think about the perfection trap. Is this work professional? Does this meet a professional standard? Not, is this perfect? Is this great? Is this the absolute best I can do, or the best that's ever been done? Is this professional?
All right. I have one question here that's going to almost reverse it. I'm not a perfectionist, but I'm being managed by one.
Help.
Help.
Yes, exactly. When you're being managed by a perfectionist, here are a few things that are helpful to do. You want to come at that person with some degree of compassion. recognizing, as said earlier, that as much stress as they're creating for everybody else, they're creating that much stress for themselves. One thing that's very helpful with a perfectionist is to always ask their expectation for how something, the level to which something should be done. Always go in saying, okay, this is, this is one of 4 things that we're doing right now. So my question is, to what degree does this need to be really fully baked? Do you expect that this can be a 90%, 80%, 70%? How much do you think this needs to be done to the highest possible standard? And the first thing they're going to say, well, is, oh, well, of course it needs to be done to the highest possible standard. I'm a perfectionist. And then when that's the response, say, okay, I understand that. Then where can we make an adjustment? I'm just talking about the realities of the time and the resources we have here. And we don't want to fall down on something else. So if you're asking for 100%, and I wouldn't even mention 100, I'd say asking for 95%. Here, then we're probably going to have to sacrifice it somewhere else. So I think that that's one of the things that you can do. Another thing, I had a moment, I've mentioned this before, but not in this context. I had a moment where I was talking about the perfection trap. It was in London, and it's a big event before we were in lockdown. And I said something about perfectionism and how, it's not whatever I said. And I said, of course, in some fields, it probably does have to be 100%. Oh, I was talking about that 90, 80, 70 thing. So in some fields, it probably has to be 100%, like a, brain surgeon. So I was just kind of tossing it off my head. And afterwards, this woman came up to me and she said, I want to challenge you on what you said about surgery. She said, because I am the chief of surgery at the Royal Ophthalmological Hospital down the road. And I am here to tell you that the perfectionistic surgeons all get the worst results. They get the worst results because their team is terrified to say anything to them. And she said, and what I say to people is, if you're working with a perfectionist, you really have a responsibility to challenge them and force them into asking questions about cost and benefit and trade-off. And that's kind of a demonstration of what I was doing there, that it's really an important learning for them. And that to be clear also with them, that if the expectations are a certain level, that probably the stress that this is going to put on the team is going to undermine the effort in another way. So I just really love to work with you on how we can do that, without some accusation of perfectionism, but really like to work with you on how we can minimize some of the stress that's on this team, because I feel that this has the potential to undermine the kind of results that I know you're thinking. It's a tough thing to manage, a real chronic perfectionist. And that person, how many times have I sat in a meeting and said, everybody who works with her says she's really difficult to work with because of her standards. So I don't think we want to put her in this position. So you can be helpful to that person. But if they just are obdurate, then you might want to think about something else.
I've got one from Rebecca, and it's can fall under almost all of the habits that you've covered in your book, but it's zeroing in, and I know everybody's going to resonate with this one. A role opens up, you say you don't think you're ready, but then you realize you're doing it as an intern role. How do you say, actually, I do want this opportunity, but you feel you've damaged your credibility by the initial conversation where you said you weren't?
Well, we're all human, so we can all go back and say, that job you mentioned the other day, I realized as I thought about it for a few minutes that I'm actually quite ready to do this job for these reasons. You want to be specific. I can do this job for these reasons. In the position I'm in, I've learned these skills. I've developed these connections. I have the ability to bring resources to this particular effort. So you want to be really specific and, not fake, but write down what those things are that you're good at, and recognize that the person who's going to move into that job is also going to be someone who's never done that job, so that you're not competing against the person who's done the job and has all the skills. You're competing against other people who have not done that job, who will have some learning curve, but some of them are going to be very confident and clear in articulating why they believe they're ready for it, what kind of skills they bring, and what their plan is for addressing any kind of learning curve. That's really, really important to do. If you get a job description that has 6 qualifications, you can be pretty sure that nobody's got all 6 of those qualifications. And in my experience, it's only women who ever imagine that they need all 6. And so you want to go back at that and say, but you want to be specific. You want to say, these are the reasons I think that I could be very good at this job and how I would fit in and make a contribution.
All right. Are you ready for one more?
I think I got time for one more.
Okay, this is a great one. Okay, let me get back. This is from Abigail. She said, of course, in times of performance evaluation and salary reviews, how do you recommend taking your prepared contributions, achievements, or skill set and presenting them as an objective argument with monetary values? Boy, that's a really strong question.
That's a great question. First of all, it's a really good idea to always keep a little list on your desk, on your laptop, of what contributions you've made, what achievements you've made, what successes you've had, because we forget them over time. We really forget them. So you want that list. Then when you're going into the performance review, you want to review that list. You want to add to it. You want to kind of fill it out in terms of anything else. And then you want to think creatively. Okay, I was able to solve that problem with this division, which wasn't finding the resources that it needed in order to get this product out the door. And then, can you put an exact monetary value on that? Maybe you can. Often you can't. And often if you do, you actually might be underselling what the contribution was. And you can say, this could have numerous impacts on the success we later had with this initiative. It may be difficult to put a precise figure around that, but I would estimate that because of what I did, I was able to, either save the company this much or expand the base for the market for this much. So really, you want to think very much in terms of value creation. But if you can't be highly specific about those numbers because they're things that lay outside of your control, don't let that stop you from saying, I believe this is one of the reasons that this initiative was as successful as it was. And as you know, that resulted in X number of new customers, or in X number of savings in terms of claimants, if your insurance, whatever it is. I think that's a really good way of doing it. So you aspire to be as specific as possible. You want to present it as data rather as information, as we talked about earlier, as information. Here's information about some of the outcomes, about what I was able to contribute here. And if possible to put exact numbers around it, great. If not, don't hold back, because you can be clear about the larger causes, the larger outcomes that really led to success, and why you were instrumental in that.
Beautiful. All right. So I see it's 1 o'clock. Sally, We are getting great messages in the chat box. And in fact, Melissa says, thank you. This has been wonderful information. I'm looking forward to digging into your book. Yes, everybody, buy this book.
Thank you.
It'll be your Bible. And also, I'd like the rest of you to take your opportunity to give a personal thanks to Sally in the chat box too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sally, as you know, when I first contacted you, how excited I was. I want to sincerely thank you for your wisdom, your inspiration, and the 30 years that you've dedicated to supporting women leaders. Thank you very much. And then on top of it, still showing up today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Darlene.
All
Real
right.
pleasure.
Everybody
Bye,
else,
everyone. Beautiful.
make sure to go to sallyhelgesen.com for more information, or howwomenrise.com.
Yeah. Or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sally.
Bye-bye.
All right, we're going to move into part 2. Say goodbye, Sally. All right, I'm going to just pause for a minute here and we get the PowerPoint back up. All right. For those of you that are still able to stick around for the great opportunity to really share and learn from each other, because we're going to do a surface on the rest of the 12 habits. But knowing that you haven't read the book, but also you haven't really gotten into more in-depth information during the first hour presentation. But if you're still sticking around for it, this is what we're going to do. The goal is to share and learn from each other. We're going to have 5 to 6 people per group. There's going to be a total of 20 to 25 minutes for the full breakout session. And then if you're wondering who's going to actually facilitate the breakout session, I have 2 members, Beth and Andrea, who are part of the professional development team here at Carlson Women Global Connect. They will facilitate it if they're in your group, or the person with the closest birth date will facilitate the activity. So when you first get into the room, make sure to introduce yourself briefly. Then what we want you to do is share the following information with each other to learn and grow with your peers. What is the #1 habit that holds you back from getting a raise, promotion, or a job? And I'm going to go into those into the next slide. And what can you do or have done to overcome this habit? Maintain confidentiality in the room too. All right, next slide. I want you to get out your phone and take a picture of this, because not only to help you with the breakout session, but to have it on your phone so that you can readily access it and apply it. All right, reluctance. There are 12 habits covered in the book. Reluctance to claim your achievements. We talked about 2, expecting others to spontaneously notice and reward your contributions. 3, overvaluing expertise. In other words, trying to master every detail of your job. In fact, there was a question on that one. Building rather than leveraging relationships. Failing to enlist allies from day 1. Putting your job before your career, which again, we talked about that today. Number 7, we spent a fair amount of time on the perfection trap. One of the types of clients I typically get are the disease to please. I think everybody is familiar with that term. Minimizing, that's acknowledging the existence of others by making yourself small. And too much, it's basically reducing your emotional register, your emotions, your conversation style, and so on. Ruminating, everybody's familiar with that. And then letting your radar distract you. You're unable to filter out all the unhelpful distractions. That's actually one of our strengths, but it can distract you because of the fact that it keeps you unfocused, and people can start judging you from that perspective. Okay, so if you could, Amy, put us into the breakouts.
Everyone should be back now.
Okay, before I go into, first of all, welcome back. I hope you're as energized as I am about the breakout session, I had one person in my group and we had a very robust, Erica, there you are, very robust conversation. So I really benefited from that. Thank you. So before we go into the what's next, would you please put in the chat box, what did you learn today? And even better, what are you going to apply? Because I'm going to capture all this information. I'm going to share it with Sally. Because it not only will help us see what you have learned and apply, it will help her going forward with her additional speakers, presentations and things like that. So I'll pause for a few minutes on that. Ooh, I learned that being a perfectionist isn't unique. Oh, that is so well said. Yes. Let's see. Using language of contributions instead of achievement, and that, oh, they're going fast. I won't be able to read them all. Okay. You guys can see them too. Love it. I learned that I need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Very nice, Rebecca. Mary Angela, use my network more effectively. Yes. Yes. The number one, again, habit was we expect people to reward us and know what we're doing, but Jennifer says I'm going to send a quick update emails to my boss about what I'm done and coordinated during the week. That's beautiful. Beth says, I learned some ways to share my accomplishments as a contribution. Yes. All right. So thank you again for sticking around for the breakout session. Again, you are taking what you've learned to the next level by really sharing your insights with your peers. And now you're sharing what you learned in the chat box. All right. So now I'm going to actually focus in on what's next at the Carlson Women Global Connect. We have another professional development webinar called the 20-Minute Networking Meeting with Marcia Ballinger. She's an author of 4 of those books. That'll be on May 25th from 12 to 1:30. More information will be coming. And then the networking committee has the DEI panel and networking event on April 21st, same time, 12 to 1. And then mentoring, that is again led by Mary Angela Baker. She's actually just launched the peer-to-peer mastermind peer mentorship groups and the Gold Mentoring Initiative. You received information from that last Thursday. So if you are interested, make sure to sign up. I know the sign up dates are, for the 2 is April 11th, and then the other one is April 6th. So check your emails. All right. Now, Amy, can you launch the poll? Because we want to know what you thought of the session and what else we should do next.
All right, Amy, Darlene, the poll is closed now.
All right. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And this is not only coming from me, it's coming from Tori, it's coming from Amy, it's coming from all of our leadership committees at the Carlson Women Global Connect. This was our very first webinar, and I am so grateful that all of you attended, and even really grateful for Sally Helgesen stepping up to the plate. And this was her gift to us, her gift of knowledge, her gift of wisdom, and her gift of continuing leading women down the path for them to reach their full potential. So again, this is from me and my team, Beth and Andrea. Thank you again, and I hope to see you at the next webinar.